Prologue, The Seer's Mirror. Recorded during the early years of the dawn of radiance, approximately 147,094 to 147,100 DR. The storm had yet to earn a name. It did not rage, it waited. It never got one. Ozone thickened the air, sharp at the back of the throat. Static prickled across the skin, a restless charge that seemed to settle into bone and stone alike, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Far above mortal reach, Zione stood rigid within the obsidian chamber of visions atop Storm's spire. Outside, winds sang across jagged crystal spires jutting from a barren valley of stone and sand. Their scraping never pierced the chamber's hush. The sound reached the walls and stopped, as though silence itself had been claimed. Within, one feature drew the eye, a shard embedded deep in the stone, its surface reflecting not light, but echo. Something older than image lingered there, caught and held. It was neither ornament nor warning. It was a reminder. The air within the chamber remained fixed, preserved by the imperious will of Heartspire, not as shelter, but as containment. Here nothing drifted, nothing dissipated. Consequence was allowed to remain where it was placed. Heartspire pressed on Zione's mind. It did not speak, nor did it guide. It permitted no choice to pass unnoticed. The chamber itself was a scar hollowed through black stone. Cerulean script ran in faint grooves along the walls, their meanings thinning even for the hand that had carved them. Light did not travel cleanly here. It gathered instead, crouching in muted pockets, catching along hidden crystal veins before retreating again. A persistent hum filled the air, not sound, but resonance, seeping from the stone and settling into bone. The scent of scorched sandalwood lingered beneath the mineral tang of damp rock, subtle but inescapable. Each breath carried a faint tingling across the skin, a reminder that Heartspire was not merely present, but engaged. Everything here was precise, measured, not in mercy, in allowance. Nothing dared to feel alive before the console that stretched before him. Not your usual table. A stone slab jutted from the floor, slanted like the spine of some ancient beast, hinting at powers meant only for moments of dire need. Cerulean etchings webbed its surface, sigils of sight and memory, worn thin by centuries of wind and restless hands. At its center lay a narrow recess, no wider than a palm and as long as Zione's outstretched arm. It was empty, intentionally so. No reflection or water, only space reserved for a purpose. Zione unstoppered the glass ampule and paused, steadying his breath. The sand within carried more than weight, that much was certain. The warnings of the ancients did not shout, they pressed, a remembered caution that transformation was never obedient. Within the vial, the grains were colorless until they met the air. He tipped it. The sand spilled in a slow, gleaming stream, silver unfurled like winter's breath, curling as if retracing routes long abandoned. It did not fall so much as arrive, drifting with purpose rather than gravity. It settled into the recess with a soft, hungry. The sand refused to mound. It slithered, and in a flash became quicksilver, filling the channel from edge to edge. Runes along the console's rim flickered as embers stirred back to life. The liquid surface drew upward, pulled by an invisible force toward the ceiling. A mirror rose, not summoned, not conjured, transformed. The glass stood 2 feet high, thin as a knife's edge, utterly still. It had no frame, no backing. Its surface was so smooth that a hand might pass through it without knowing where air ended and vision began. Zioni's reflection never formed. It never did. Instead, the world took shape. A tightening passed through him, not confined to thought or spirit, but felt in the body itself. His lungs drew air that seemed to thicken as it entered, each breath heavier than the last. His pulse quickened, not racing, but irregular, a stuttered rhythm that echoed the instability pressing at the edge of his awareness. This was no ordinary glimpse. This was a threshold. At first, the mirror held only blurred color, smears of green and brown, a wash of sky, the suggestion of wind in motion. Nothing distinct enough to name, nothing stable enough to trust. Then the image deepened, focused. It drew him in until it became a window he might fall through if he stepped too close. Zioni did not blink. A child appeared, beneath a towering tree, worlds away. The Hakatarn tribes of Umberthar called it Veilbark, the homeland tree. Its trunk twisted up from dark soil, bark knotted into ridges and hollows worn smooth by generations of touch. Roots spread wide across the hill, gripping the earth like ancient fingers, anchoring deep. Wisps of incense smoke drifted through the lower branches, carrying juniper and blazing star, scents sacred not by decree, but by long familiarity. When her hand touched the bark, a fragment of a lullaby slipped from her lips. It was an old melody, passed down without notation or name, shaped to echo the land's rhythm rather than impose upon it. The notes were soft, uneven, never quite the same twice. They did not call, they did not command, they simply rested where they fell. Something far below stirred, not waking, not responding, but acknowledging the pattern. The air around the tree shifted almost imperceptibly. Leaves trembled where there was no wind. The roots held fast. Even here, Zioni could feel it. The girl laughed, the sound bright and unguarded against Umberthar's biting wind. A wild fox pup, russet, bright-eyed, fearless, darted around her hands. It was clumsy enough to stumble over its own paws, bold enough to nip at her fingers. No collar or rope bound them, no charm, spell, or rune marked its fur. The fox had chosen to stay, just as surely as the girl had chosen to love. Zioni watched her stroke the pup's head, smoothing fur from its ears. He noticed the small crease at the corner of her mouth when she focused. When she paused, the fox mirrored her stillness, bright eyes locked on hers in silent understanding. It tilted its head. She echoed the gesture, a wordless connection. He listened to her gentle nonsense, sounds Heartspire could not translate. Meaning lived here in posture, not language. She whispered a name the wind would one day carry, he murmured to himself. Chi-Chi. The mirror did not answer, but as Zioni pressed his hands to the silver surface, its warmth grew. Around him, the chamber remained still. Above, the heart spire of Crystal Haven watched through him. Zioni felt it as pressure behind his thoughts, a weight that never lifted. Heartspire owned every mind here. It did not speak or try to move. It corrected. Its presence in the chamber was undeniable. A suggestion formed where thought should have been. You should not let that pressure affect you. Just observe. Do not intervene. Zioni watched the girl anyway. Her name he knew, though no scroll had given it to him. Narnini, child of the Hukatarn, daughter of a chieftain who did not see how small the ground beneath his people had become. Zioni had seen 1,000 mortal children in the mirror before. They flickered through lives that began and ended in the space between handfuls of sand. Most were loud, brief, brilliant sparks that vanished before he could consider what they might have become. This one was different. As she moved through the world, her attention lingered where others passed without pause. She traced the patterns the wind left behind in fallen leaves, following their paths as if they were deliberate. She counted heartbeats, not her own, but the world's, using their rhythm to measure when to step, when to stop, when to wait. Nothing about the habit was taught. Nothing about it was named. It did not announce itself as power. It registered as alignment. At times, the air around her seemed to hesitate, as though responding to a cadence only she perceived. Small things shifted first. Leaves turned a breath before the wind reached them. Small creatures, birds, insects, even the fox, paused as she passed, as if awaiting a silent cue. Something in her resonated with the things buried deep beneath the world, and with the thing buried deep beneath his feet. The console trembled beneath Zioni's hands, only a little, only enough for him to feel the chamber's disapproval. Observe, but do not reach. The message did not change. Zioni's fingers tightened around the console's edge. Light from the glass brightened suddenly, and for a moment he could hear his own heartbeat in the silence, steady, relentless. The chamber held its breath as the view shifted closer to Veilbark's base. The fox pup stirred first. Chi-Chi's head snapped up, ears pricked at something the girl could not yet sense. The fox turned toward the tree, nose twitching, eyes alert. Zioni did not speak aloud. Without moving his lips, he deliberately formed a thought, not a command, not a plea, and allowed Heartspire to see it. There, show her. A forbidden ripple. Zioni felt it surge, shattering the chamber's stillness. Memories of Heartspire's warnings clawed at his mind, tales of others who had dared to interfere, of the isolating silences that followed. Fear rose sharp and immediate, not of punishment alone, but of being removed. The air pulsed with invisible energy. The mirror's surface trembled, as if sensing intent rather than instruction. Pressure spiked behind Zioni's eyes, Heartspire's objections slamming into his will. But it was too late. The mirror had already answered. The fox padded to Veilbark's trunk and pressed its small body against the bark. The tree did not move. It attended. Roots shifted deep below, loosening the earth. Chi-Chi scrabbled at the ground. Small claws scraped soil that few mortal eyes had looked upon for generations. Dust fell in thin curls. Something beneath the roots caught the dying light and gave it back, a faint, pulsing glow. "Hey," Narnini breathed. Zioni could not hear the word, only the shape of wonder on her lips. She crawled forward on her knees, the pup dancing at her side like a guardian too small to guard anything. Her fingers brushed the edge of the glow, pushing earth aside until what lay beneath was revealed. A sliver of crystal, small but undeniable, no longer part of any whole, just a broken shard the length of a child's thumb, colorless until it caught the light. Among ancient circles, it was whispered that such shards had once formed the core of Heartspire itself, pulsing with the resonance of sorceries long since diminished. They were said to be fragments of a binding that had held the realm's deepest forces in careful balance, not destroyed, merely contained. Doyen and Doyenné told an old fireside tale of a time when the Heartspire shards sang softly to the sky, their glow guiding lost travelers home when roads failed and maps lied. Those who claimed to have seen them rarely spoke clearly of what they witnessed. They returned altered, burdened with visions of lands no longer named, their sleep unsettled by a low, persistent hum they could not forget. Whether these stories were true, a distortion, or the slow decay of memory was never agreed upon. But the shards remained, and their presence, undeniable, unmoving, lent weight to the suspicion that some things were not meant to vanish entirely, only to be broken and remembered imperfectly. This one had rested here long before Zioni entered the chamber, before anyone named the power Heartspire. It had been buried and waiting, like a promise left by someone who never returned. The iron bands tightened behind Zioni's eyes, swelling into a warning roar. Do not. He leaned closer to the mirror, his focus unbroken. Narnini picked up the shard. It rested against her skin for the space of a single heartbeat. Then it dissolved, quietly, without warning. The crystal did not crack, melt, or shatter. It simply ceased to be a thing apart. Light bled into her palm, threading through tiny veins and bone. She gasped, not in pain but in surprise, and clutched at her hand. Chi-Chi barked, sharp and startled, backing away as though something larger had stepped into their space. Beneath the roots of veal bark, where ancient soil cradled secrets untold, the old power woke. It shifted its weight. The roots unfurled, remembering the embrace of time, drawing strength from veins that pulsed with memories of forgotten whispers. High above, in Crystal Haven, Heartspire's hidden lattice burned bright. Zioni staggered as a wave of force slammed into his thoughts. For a moment there was no mirror, no child, no tree, only white, blank, and a voice. No sound, only the crushing insistence of a rule broken. You interfered. The glass flickered, the image blurred, then snapped back just in time for him to see Narnini open and close her hand. No wound. Her hand held only air. Only a faint shimmer in her eyes, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. Zioni drew a breath and held it. The pressure in his skull retreated, coiling back into the chamber's stone, leaving behind the echo of contact rather than its force. Somewhere deeper in Crystal Haven, a distant mind stirred. A second seer would feel the ripple. Heartspire would make sure of it. Zioni knew what that meant. The consequences were no longer avoidable. He had broken a lore he could no longer name. He had changed a life he had never been meant to touch. The mirror did not care. It was not finished. The image thinned as Umberthar's slopes and dark winds washed into a mist of shifting silver. Within that haze, echoes of Narnini's earlier glow shimmered faintly through the fog as if tracing an unseen connection. New shapes formed, hard lines, sharp ridges, defined by a delicate sheen that mirrored the faint luminescence once buried beneath veal bark. The cracked knife edge of the broken watershed north of Kerr Lake emerged, touched by the same ethereal quality that bound two distant places without bridge or road. Far north of Vealbark, west of the Frostfall tundra, water slept beneath ice. On those ridges, another figure moved, older than the girl, shoulders still growing, eyes fixed on the fractured stone of a relic's ring. Marcus. He found solace in the land's silent strength, a habit learned in long afternoons beside his grandfather, a revered hunter who taught him to read the earth's stories rather than impose his own. For now, the world only glanced at him. A boy is already stepping toward duty, toward expectation, toward a war he had not chosen. The mirror did not call it prophecy. It watched. Doubt brushed the edge of Marcus's thoughts as he stood in the cold wind. The weight of a lineage he could not escape pressed quietly against ambition that had not yet learned its limits. The questions did not settle, they lingered. Neither child had yet walked far enough from their father's shadows to know they had been seen.